Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So what if being a mankind idiot? One nation controlled by the media. Information age of hysteria. It's going out to idiot America.
And the craziest year of politics in living memory is continuing, not only continuing, quite possibly escalating. Hillary Clinton hasn't, it would seem, broken the law by keeping her emails private. This obsession with privacy and secrecy that she has, however, has done her untold damage. Donald Trump remains sort of Teflon in a way. It doesn't really seem that any of the normal rules of politics have applied to him since the beginning of this campaign. And I'm going to try today to just sort of find some common ground, if that's even vaguely possible. Because otherwise, every day for the next, oh, God knows how long, is just going to be spent between people screaming at each other and never really making any progress. That applies to Brexit too, which we'll also talk about. But let's start in America. And I don't know how much you know about America. I know I have a lot of American listeners, both in the States and, of course, here. But I don't. It's not a country that lends itself to proper understanding, because from a British perspective, our knowledge of America, whether it's first-hand or second-hand, usually comes from the coasts, doesn't it? It's either the East Coast, where you sort of have the institutions of government and law, or the West Coast, where you have kind of showbiz and Hollywood. And yet, of course, the massive majority of America is like Stoke-on-Trent, whereas we're just focusing on London and Edinburgh. The massive majority of America will be like, not even Stoke-on-Trent, actually, more like Stoke-Poges. It'll be like places that we've never heard of. It'll be places where lives are just unfolding and being led in a way that never really impacts outside of their own little universe. This isn't a criticism, it's an observation. You say America to me, and I think of the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, Disneyland and Hollywood films. But that's not America at all. That would be like Britain being represented by Beefeaters and Routemaster buses. And of course we know increasingly that the people who aren't part of the, if you like, the big ticket are very, very resentful about being, and I quote, left behind. And those are the two words I want to look at today with your help. I'm going to try not to have any scraps today. Obviously, when I make that promise to you, I usually break it. And most days I don't make that promise to you because we all love a scrap. But it just seems to me a little bit pointless now to be going, Crooked Hillary's a liar, Donald Trump's a pervert. I mean, Crooked Hillary is probably a liar. We're all liars. We've all told lies. Donald Trump is, by his own admission, a pervert. These things are just true, and they're not shifting support on either side. So the louder that people on Hillary Clinton's side point out that the man is a pervert who mocks dead heroes, the more people on his side shout out that Hillary Clinton is a liar who was married to a philanderer, and neither side ever give an inch. I don't think any of the votes, any of the undecideds who hold the future of America in their hand this week, are going to be persuaded by the volume of the shouting on either side. You know, it seems to me to be something subtler that's going to settle this election. And I want to look at this question of the left behind. And I make no apology, given that introduction, for starting that with a film. There's an old Michael J. Fox film where his dad... Is it Michael J. Fox, or am I getting mixed up with Wall Street? What's the film where the dad works in an aeroplane factory and it's sort of getting assets stripped, and the son, who's gone off to Wall Street to make his millions and his billions, it faces that massive moral dilemma. Like, does he do what's right for his dad's aeroplane factory, or does he do what's right for his corporate bosses and sort of milk the place for as much money as possible while throwing everybody there on the scrap heap? Forgive me for not remembering which film it was. It's Michael J. Fox, isn't it? Isn't it? I'm looking at blank faces. Michael Douglas is in Wall Street. But anyway, someone will remind me. That's the beauty of social media, or crowdfunding, as we call it, in the production process. And it sums everything up for me, weirdly, as good films and good books, good art always does. They're the people that have been left behind, right? This is, I think, much of Trump's support comes from people who have, rightly or wrongly, arrived at a conclusion that they've been left behind. They've been waiting in line for their slice of the American dream, and they think they've been obeying all the rules by waiting in line. I thought Nick's Vox Pops today were brilliant. The people talking about everyone on the East Coast is a scrounger, everybody is getting something for nothing. It's demonstrably untrue, just as it was demonstrably untrue here. But once these seeds take root, once these ideas start to spread, they're very hard to stop. It's very, very, very hard to reason people out of a position into which they have not been reasoned in the first place. If they've been led into a position through fear and nonsense propaganda and lies, you really struggle to get them out of that position because they've already rejected factual evidence and truth. But there is a truth in the sense that they've been left behind. They feel that they've been left behind. They're blaming the wrong people. So who are the right people? I don't actually know. I'm rather embarrassed to say. I think this is the point at which phrases like free market, neoliberalism, globalism come into play. But what has happened instead, it seems... Phone lines are open, by the way. I'm just warbling. If you want to interrupt me and join in, just treat it like your show, not mine, okay? It kind of is. 0345 6060973 is the number you need if you want to join in. But it seems to me they've been waiting in line for their slice of the American dream, and they don't think they've got it. Now, what they do, because unpleasant people, and we've got our version in Britain, of course, what they do is see women, and we're talking really about, go back to the 1950s and 1960s, it's white men who have first dibs on the American dream. That's not a racist observation, it's a historical one. You had segregation within living memory for some of these people. Racial segregation, actually places on public transport where you couldn't sit if you were the wrong colour. Milk counters where you weren't allowed to be served if you were the wrong colour. So these white guys have been standing in line waiting for their slice of the American dream, and they haven't got it. And what they have seen is Mexicans and women and African Americans come past them in their mind and get their hands on that slice of the American dream first. So if you wanted to, it would be very, very easy to appeal to that sense of being left behind and factor into it, well, it's all their fault. I don't think I've said anything you can disagree with yet, have I? This is pretty much what is happening. They've been told it's all their fault. That's why following an African-American president with a female candidate was part of the perfect storm into which Trump has waded, because it flies in the face of that old-fashioned view that white men should get first dibs. Look, we do the hard work. We do the heavy lifting. We look after the house. We look after the family. Therefore, we get first dibs on the spoils. And we look after our wives and we look after our children, but we are the hunter-gatherer, the leader, you know, the man of the house. That's just changing now. Society is changing. But if you're struggling to accept that change, the idea that you follow a African-American with a woman is going to, it's the nuclear option in a way for these guys who've been waiting in line for their slice of the American dream. So, I mean, it probably puts me in the kind of category of not understanding what the real world is like lie today. So that's the other lie that we hear. Like, you don't know what life is like in the real world. Actually, I do. In the real world, women aren't inferior, and the colour of your skin is not an indicator of what quality of employee you're going to be. That's the real world. The world people who talk about the real world are referring to is actually the unreal world, the world that did exist, where being white and male gave you, and it still does, let's be honest, in the main. And just look around. Positions of power in this country held by people who are neither white nor male, possible exception of the Prime Minister, of course, are very thin on the ground. But you have this sense that you should have been at the front of the queue, and you're not. And then I come back to that aircraft factory in that film that I can't remember the name of. I haven't checked my texts or tweets yet, but it will be that it was Wall Street. It was Martin and Charlie Sheen in Wall Street. It was, I don't know where I got Michael J. Fox from. That's the other one. Anyway, that's the point. Why are they not getting their slice of the American dream? Whose fault is it really? That's what I want you to have a crack at today. Whose fault is it really that these people who feel left behind are left behind? They're blaming the wrong people. We always do in economic problems. We blame the Jews. We blame the immigrants. We blame anybody, actually, rather than either blaming ourselves or blaming the people that we've decided to put in charge over decades. Whose fault is it that your average American man, outside of the big cities or even in the big former industrial heartlands of the country, whose fault is it that they're not getting the slice of the pie that they feel that they were born to deserve? They've played by the rules. They've stood in line. They've put in a shift. And they haven't got the spoils that they thought they were going to get, that the American dream always promised they would get. Whose fault is it that they haven't got it? Because I think when I came at it from this angle over the weekend, I understood for the first time the depth of antipathy towards Hillary Clinton, because she, I think, represents a sort of world order to these guys, doesn't she? She sort of represents, this is what they mean when they talk about the establishment, again, on both sides of the Atlantic. The establishment is why I'm stuck in line. So although I'm blaming the wrong people at the first hurdle, it's not the fault of Mexicans that my life in Missouri has not gone the way that I hoped, or indeed the fault of any immigrants that my life in Michigan is not unfolding in the way that I imagined it would. Maybe it is, in their minds, fair to say it is the fault of the people that have been in charge, whether they're Democrat or Republican. And suddenly the Trump juggernaut makes at least a modicum of sense. Here's the system. The system is what has held me back. Okay, I can be persuaded that it's Mexicans and migrants, but actually it's the system. And the Clintons together represent almost an embodiment of the system. That's what they're rebelling against. That's what they're rejecting. That's what's making them so cross. So, after the travel news, I want you to answer this question. What is your explanation for these guys who are left behind? Why are they left? And you can be as simplistic or as complicated as you want on this. It seems to me the most important question of our age, on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, actually. But we'll start in America today. These guys are described as the left behind. They often don't describe themselves as that. They see themselves more as frustrated heroes than actual abandoned children. But this phrase, everyone agrees on, the left behind. They've been left behind. It's almost the opposite of the elite, whatever that means. In the olden days, you just said successes and failures, but that's not fair, because these people perhaps rightly feel that their failure is not their fault. It's the result of a changing world. And they're right, the world has changed, but not necessarily in the way that the right-wing demagogues are telling them. And if you want to get really confused, think about that phrase I just used, right-wing. How would you describe me, if you're kind enough to listen to the programme on a regular basis? Would you describe me as right-wing? Because I spend an awful lot of time banging on about people who've been left behind. I spend an awful lot of time banging on about austerity and food banks and poverty and people who can't afford really to keep their heads above water, people who aren't paid enough, people who are being exploited by their workers. I've spoken about these things in all the years we've known each other. I've bored you rigid on countless occasions, sticking up for the less fortunate, for the left behind. And yet I'm genuinely or generally considered to be left-wing. So how has it suddenly become right-wing to talk about people who have been left behind? There's some food for thought for you at 10:16 on a Monday morning. You can hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 60 60 973. They've been left behind. Let's not argue about whether that's true or not. Let's take as our starting point that simple statement. These people have been left behind. Question? Who by? 0345 60 60 973. Whose fault is it that large swathes of white America feel that they've played by the rules and not received the prize they were promised? Now, I thought I was on uncontroversial territory when I used the phrase left behind. One person's already complained, said, how dare you describe people who don't agree with you as left behind? I'm not. I'm using the phrase that they use to explain why Donald Trump is so successful. He speaks for people who feel that they've been left behind. And I want you to tell me who they've been left behind by. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. Claire's in Stratford. Claire, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi. I just wanted to make two quick points. But my first point was, I think it's difficult for us to conceptualise right and left in America. For instance, I am a Tory voter here, but for my cousins who live in the Bronx, positively, I might as well be in Momentum. That's how left they think I am. And I think everyone...
And what sort of issues do you break down on? What sort of issues would you...
Well, just on welfare, on healthcare, and they're black, and I'm black, and so even education, I might as well be Red Ken. You know, they think I'm so far left. And I say to them, people in the UK actually think I'm really, really right-wing, and they can't believe that. You know, I think a lot of people would be shocked that if we had a President Obama here, he would make Nigel Farage probably look quite appealing, because he's not actually that left-wing in comparison to our politics. And
which makes sense when we feel massive confusion about how, for example, healthcare can be controversial. A president introduces the notion that everybody in the country deserves access to free healthcare, or at least health insurance, and this is controversial. I think British people struggle to how can it be controversial to want to cure sick people? But it is, for the reasons that you touch on. Who I mean,
point I wanted to make.
yes, go on briefly.
I think you're wrong about Trump in a way. Let me just clarify myself.
But I haven't said anything that.
Okay. Well, let me just say, I think everything he says about Hillary Clinton is correct. I think she's a crook, and I think she's very dubious. However, I think she's the best of a worst option. It's like, do you want a kick in the face or a punch in the teeth?
Well, neither.
This is the point.
But it's an either-or choice. I mean, you can call her a crook. Of course you can. It's a free country, but it also flies in the face of the evidence. I mean, the FBI appeared to have thrown the election in Donald Trump's direction by announcing the investigation. Theoretically, the announcement that the investigation has yielded no evidence should have thrown it back in the opposite direction, but it hasn't. The perception is there. Hillary Clinton is an unsympathetic character, but she's a public servant. The comparison with Trump is utterly bogus, but we're not doing that today. We're not just sticking our fingers in the ears and shouting over the fence at the other side. Oh, this is nice. Sir Robert Worcester, one of the most famous pollsters in the world, I think it's fair to say. The founder, of course, of Maury has rung in. So I will call you Robert in Allington today, if that's all right with you, Sir Robert. There's no special treatment, no fear or favour on this programme. Robert in Allington, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say, first of all, you tell from my accent that I'm an American by birth. I grew up, you mentioned Missouri. I grew up in Missouri. I was born in Missouri.
Oh, great.
Actually. Lived right in the center of the red states. A lot of those people left behind are people that I knew, that I grew up with, that I was in school with. I go back to 1968 and the racial disharmony that was going on there. That's the time that in my boyhood, the local swimming pool, the municipal swimming pool, was closed rather than to allow blacks to swim in the pools. I was on the national board of the American Civil Liberties Union at that time, and I know what that is. And
yes.
Today, there are several things that you didn't mention at all. I think there's a high correlation between the red states, gun ownership, and that's key, Second Amendment, that people argue, Americans argue, certainly Donald Trump argued, that is central to all of this. And of course, you've got the crime and drugs that didn't really exist. At least they were a minor issue back when I was growing up in Kansas City. So that is a big part of the resentment. And the symbol of it is this gun ownership. And this is a very strong point that hardly has had any attention at all. In '68, we did a study, firm I was with in the United States, in Trenton, when they were burning down, when blacks were burning down Trenton. And what was the resentment there? It was a fight between the Italians who had been squeezed out.
Wow.
They had only had 10 or 20 years of preferment for local jobs, the city jobs,
yes,
workers, and they felt that they needed their 50 years after the Italians had theirs, and they were being pushed on by the blacks. And that resentment is very, very strong among the Trump supporters.
I mean, I hesitate to put words into your mouth, but it's almost as if it's simply reality that they resent. It's the changing nature of society. There's no suggestion from sensible people, is there, that this isn't been any way engineered or there's a conspiracy to punish these guys. They've just woken up on the wrong side of history.
People don't like change. They never like change. As you grow older, you get resentful about change. I think most of us do that. And you have to start from a pretty left-wing side. And as far as you're being right-wing and left-wing, sometimes you're ranting on one side, and sometimes you're ranting on the other.
I never rant, Sir Robert Worcester. How dare you? I tell you, measured but occasionally impassioned monologues. I know they're never rants. And yet, I mean, clearly, there is that sense then that the fact that more rights have been accrued by minorities and, of course, by women, even though they still lag behind by all, or at least by most meaningful measures, this is the mindset of people who feel as if they've been kept at the back of the queue while others have pushed in front of them.
Absolutely. My children, my son, very left wing, his wife very left wing, and she was saying, but he wanted a job.
Yeah.
And he's an academic. He wanted a job. He ran second to a less qualified woman because the department in the university didn't have a woman in the department and felt they should give preference.
Oh, wow, yes.
And boy, left-wing feminist woman, and she was really resentful.
Because there is a perception of unfairness. And I mean, probably a fair perception of unfairness on a personal level, albeit that on a macro level, you can completely understand the justification. Will you allow me to say I'm deeply flattered to know that you listen to the programme, Bob?
Listen, I opened LBC. I was your psophologist for the first couple of years that LBC was on air.
Part of political history in this country, and very proud to have you listening. Thank you. But you're not proud enough, however, to let you make us late for the news. Sir Robert Worcester, the founder of the doyen of pollsters, really, Maury, just giving us some more food for thought, and that's the point, really, isn't it? It's an uncomfortable conclusion to arrive at because it sounds a lot like racism, but it's not. It's a resentment of a different kind. It's this sense that I've been standing in line and the world has changed while I've been in that queue, and suddenly there's black people in the same queue and lots of women in the same queue and loads of people who I don't really feel have an equal claim to the prizes that I have, and they're all in the same queue. It's too cute to say in answer to the question of why, well, the world has changed. It's too glib. So who should they, if you're going to talk about blame, who should they be blaming for the fact that they are, quotes, left behind? It's coming up to 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've also got an example for me of how mad this whole scenario is. I've got a beautiful juxtaposition of Donald Trump and Barack Obama, one lying through his teeth and the other proving it. And yet it won't change, for the massive majority of people, it won't change anybody's mind one iota, and that, I think, is just stick around. I'll play it to you after the news. We're talking about the left behind, not in the context of Britain yet, although when we move on to Brexit in the next hour, it may well recur, it may well come back round again, but in the context of America, and this sense that people feel, rightly or wrongly, that they've been left behind, not only left behind, but overtaken by people from ethnic minorities, overtaken by women, overtaken by people who seem to get more help than we get, even though all meaningful measures suggest it's still best to be white and male in the Western world if you want to get ahead than to be anything other than white and male. And we'll crack on with that in a moment, but I promised you a treat. This is incredible, and this really is where people like me give up, because when you hear this, it should be the end of so many arguments and so many conversations and so many discussions about what Donald Trump is like, leaving Hillary out of it for the moment. But it isn't. This won't change a single mind. This is Donald Trump describing something that happened during a Barack Obama speech during this presidential campaign. And it's juxtaposed, I mean, literally, with what actually happened. So this is how this man treats his supporters when it comes to observable reality. And it's quite incredible.
You have to go back and look and study and see what happened.
Now listen up. I'm serious. Listen up. You've got an older gentleman who is supporting his candidate. He's not doing nothing.
He was talking to the protesters, screaming at him, really screaming at him.
First of all, we live in a country that respects free speech.
By the way, if I spoke the way Obama spoke to that protester.
Second of all, it looks like maybe he might have served in our military, and we got to respect that.
They would say, he became unhinged, he became...
Third of all, he was elderly, and we got to respect our elders.
They never moved the camera, and he spent so much time screaming at this protester, and frankly, it was a disgrace.
And fourth of all, don't boo.
Oh! You have to go back and look and study and see what happened. They never moved the camera, and he spent so much time screaming.
Now that's incredible, isn't it? Surely that's incredible. Even if you revel in the description of being a member of the basket of deplorables or the box of trolls or whatever it is, even if you gave up on fairness and equality decades ago, surely that just makes you go, wow. So Donald Trump describing Barack Obama as abusing and ranting and shouting and being horrible to a protester, when you actually can see, should we stick it on the website as well? Let's get the footage at lbc.co.uk. You can actually see him and hear him going, respect this man, respect his freedom to express an opinion, respect his seniority of years, respect your elders, and respect his apparent military service, because he was wearing a sort of confection of uniform. And yet, when Donald Trump starts speaking to his supporters about it, he doesn't just lie. I mean, it's not even embellishment and exaggeration, is it? It's absolute barefaced lies. And what's really weird, and what a lot of people who know Donald Trump quite well have said in recent months, is he accuses his enemies of doing all the things that he himself does. It's this weird sociopathic self-loathing. You know, a bit like when our flipping little mini version Farage started claiming that all men talk like sex offenders when they're in private. It's as if people who are ashamed of who they are have to believe that everybody else is the same as them. So you can almost see his weird little fingers, can't you, going when he's going, they would have said I was unhinged. Barack Obama was treating that man with respect and fairness. Had it been the other way around, he'd have got his head kicked in at a Trump convention. You know he would. You've seen black women being physically abused in the middle of a crowd for the crime of protesting. And that, to me, seems to sum everything up. But will it have changed a single mind of anybody who's seen it? Nope. 03456060973 is the number you need to join in. The question really is, who has left these people behind? If indeed you accept the description that they have been left behind. Daniel's in West Kingstown. Daniel, what would you like to say?
James, like to say you're a genius and your show's brilliant, by the way, first of all.
You're very kind. I hope there's not a big butt coming, although I do like big butts.
No, it's good. I've got a lot of American friends. I'm in England. I've got a hell of a lot of American friends, and as you said earlier on, not also just all on the east or the west coast,
yes.
in Central America,
yes.
like in Nebraska, Michigan, everywhere. And basically, there is a massive. I mean, I'm a white male, and there's a huge generation of people that obviously believe they could have been something better than what they've actually turned out in life.
Yes.
And I do believe a lot of the problem lies within the government in America in the last 20 years have allowed basically a lot of the jobs to be offshored to other parts of the world for cheaper labour, obviously, to pay corporate tax back to America.
But also to keep prices low in America. So this is to me the scales, because I get it, and it applies here as well. But you know, we talk about we've lost manufacturing, we've lost industry. But if you doubled the price of everything in the shops and said we're all going to make it in Britain, there'd be outrage, wouldn't there?
No, you are correct. I mean, the thing that Trump, I don't know if many people know, the main, everyone goes on about he's got no policies and stuff. He has actually got some policies. I mean, one of his policies is any American company that wants to basically take up shop and set up in Southeast Asia or anywhere in Mexico or everything, he's going to charge them a 35% tax levy to be selling the product back in the USA. So I mean, when people hear these sorts of things, and they're from a working class background, they've tried to generate a business and they've been undercut by Labour going abroad.
Yes. It's attractive because no one follows to the next chapter, which is to say, and of course this means that you can pay 35% more for everything that you buy because you'll be buying it from an American company.
Yeah, basically what he's just trying to do. I mean, in England we're lucky. I mean, I'm 32 years old and I was born under Thatcher. And I wasn't from a wealthy background, I'm from a working class background, but due to Thatcher giving up rights to, selling houses off from the government, I was able to get where I am today. And I think a lot of American people haven't had that opportunity, to be fair, from working class background and stuff. And
and of course, if you were to be fairer, Daniel, I would have to point out that the people who took advantage of the right to buy scheme under Margaret Thatcher and under Tony Blair and continuing into the last government are responsible in part, that policy, because they didn't replace the houses that they sold to people like you, has added to spiralling costs and shortage of social housing.
But that's what I mean. Again, it's the same sort of, if you look at it indirectly, it's another impact. It's a decision made by a government that's obviously led to people feeling they've not achieved what they could have in their life if the right decision had been made.
And then when they see the attention that is paid for historical reasons to women's rights or Black Lives Matter or civil rights, then they sort of feel, well, I'm getting stiffed too. Who's speaking up for me?
Who's speaking? And Trump is the voice for the sort of the forgotten people, as such as they see themselves in the middle part of America as such.
And they don't see themselves, the self-image, this is fascinating. You get loads of food for thought from you, thank you. But the self-image doesn't allow them to feel that they need traditional left-wing protection because they like to think of themselves as winners and pioneers. And they self-describe as right-wing, we want a strong man, we want a ruler. But actually, their grievance is essentially a grievance of left-wing politics. It's about being underrepresented, it's about being exploited at work, and it's about being denied opportunity. But they don't think that when a lefty, in quotes, stands up and starts talking about these things, and this happens in Britain as well, somehow these people don't think that lefties are talking about them. They think lefties are only talking about women and Muslims and Poles, but actually,
you're right.
it is true, isn't it?
For the whole, yeah, they speak for the whole. I mean, it's just the way I look at it. They look at Donald Trump as a figure of what an American white man should be. Okay, from a working class background, he's been. I mean, he was passed the business down through his father.
Yes,
so know about that. He's a good businessman. He has evaded tax, obviously. But
arguably a good businessman. I love that line about if he'd stuck all the money he inherited off his dad in a post office account, he'd be richer now than he is after a lifetime of doing deals.
He owns 14,000 condos in New York alone.
Yes, I mean, but again, I mean, we can see in this country that owning property is wealth. You don't have to be clever or wise or anything like that. You own enough property. Look at what Duke of Westminster said. What's your advice for being super rich? What advice would you give to people? He said, try and make sure one of your ancestors was good friends with William the Conqueror.
It's just, I mean, they look at him and they would all like to be like him. And I just think he's a big figure for the working class white man in the Midwest of America.
And it can only work. It can only work with the working class white man if he's also perceived as being an enemy of the opposite of the working class white man, which is kind of everybody: the elites, the women, the immigrants, the Mexicans, the migrants, the establishment. And that's it. I mean, I'm so glad we're doing it this way around today because, well, largely because you phoned in, Daniel, and given us such good insights. That's it, isn't it? And it's not mysterious. It's just wrong. They're blaming the wrong people. You want to blame someone, blame the fact that if you blame yourself for not buying the thing that costs twice as much but got made up the road. Blame yourself for not driving the car that's not as good as the Japanese car but does at least benefit from having been built around the corner. We all do it. How many times have we sat here and waxed lyrical and vented our collective spleen about something and say, well, the high streets are shutting, we love high streets and this, that and the other, and then we all sort of nudge past each other in the queue at the hypermarket while watching our local greengrocer and butcher go under the hammer. It's true. It's because we want cheap stuff. That's why people are getting left behind, and they wanted cheap stuff too. Donald Trump doesn't represent an alternative to that. He just represents a howl of protest, protesting against reality. What was the other thing I was going to play you was his latest advert. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm going to be late for the travel if we play it now. I'll play it you first after the travel news, because that little narrative there that Daniel has just unpicked for us, this notion of blame, this notion of if you like, responsibility and being left behind. His last advert of the campaign, it makes every point precisely. And I mean, I hesitate to invite fisticuffs, but verbal fisticuffs. But if you heard that Trump thing there with Obama, you heard that thing I just played, and you still support him, you still like him, it's on the website, you can see it with pictures now, okay? 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. How can you hear that and still have anything but contempt for the man? How can you hear him lie through his teeth demonstrably and still think that he's fit to, well, never mind run a country, he's not fit to babysit your children? It's 10:45. I get that stuck on a bumper sticker. If you wouldn't let them babysit your children, you probably shouldn't vote for them to run your country. And who'd be happy leaving their kids in the care of Donald the genital grabbing Trump? Briefly, whether you're buying or selling, letting or renting, LBC's Property Hour is a must-listen show. Join Clive Bull and his expert guests every Thursday night from 9 to keep in touch with the fast-moving property market. And download the Property Hour podcast at lbc.co.uk, where you can also win an iPhone 6S, an Apple Watch Sport and a Monster portable battery pack, thanks to Direct Line Landlord Insurance. Find out more about their de facto 5-star rated insurance by searching online for Direct Line Landlord. A lot of love coming in for the last caller, Daniel, who described quite brilliantly this sense of dispossession, this sense of being left behind and blaming recent arrivals, blaming social change, blaming civil rights, blaming women for it, where actually it's simply the fact that if I'm making widgets and I'm flogging widgets to you, and I can make those widgets in Singapore more cheaply than I can make them in Missouri, and it's still considerably cheaper after paying for it to be transported there and back, then I'm making my widgets in Singapore. For me, I don't know if you have little political mini milestones. I remember when I first learned that prawns caught in Scotland were taken to Thailand to be peeled. They were shipped there frozen and shipped back because it was actually cheaper than to go all the way to Southeast Asia to peel the seafood and bring it back to sell on the land around which the waters had yielded the prawns. That to me was one of those moments where I went, whoa. probably should have realised, actually, it was an early indicator of the centre. Was it Yeats, W.B. Yeats said, the centre will not hold, things fall apart. You read something like that, you learn something like that, you probably should have got an inkling that things will fall apart. And I'm going to talk to George and Mark. We're going to just talk today, okay? I'm not breaking it down like some sort of menu. We'll just keep talking to each other. So if you can't get through at the moment, don't worry. You'll get through later, and we'll move on to Brexit a bit, and we may do something else as well. But this advert, if you think that I'm exaggerating it, when I talk to you about just finding the ancient enemies to blame, okay? Blame, blame, blame. Listen to this advert, the final advert of the Trump campaign.
Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people. The establishment has trillions of dollars at stake in this election. For those who control the levers of power in Washington and for the global special interest, they partner with these people that don't have your good in mind. The political establishment that is trying to stop us is the same group responsible for our disastrous trade deals, massive illegal immigration, and economic and foreign policies that have bled our country dry. The political establishment has brought about the destruction of our factories and our jobs as they flee to Mexico, China, and other countries all around the world. It's a global power structure that is responsible for the economic decisions that have robbed our working class, stripped our country of its wealth, and put that money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations and political entities. The only thing that can stop this corrupt machine is you. The only force strong enough to save our country is us. The only people brave enough to vote out this corrupt establishment is you, the American people. I'm doing this for the people and for the movement, and we will take back this country for you, and we will make America great again.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message. It's like a minion. Except, of course, that that's straight out of the 1930s Berlin playbook. I've got to remind you that a stopped clock is right twice a day. So while, like you, I find anyone who reaches immediately for the Hitler button when criticising a politician is probably being a little bit lazy, twice a day a stopped clock is right. He was basically talking about Jewish bankers in the way that Hitler did. That's what he was doing. I think on the footage, if you watch it, the three faces that come up, is it Janet Yellen? I think they're all Jews. I think the three guys. There's the head of Goldman Sachs, head of the Fed, and who's the other one? There's one other. I think they're all Jews, and their faces actually come up on the screen. That's what he's saying. There's a secret cabal of people running the world. They're the reason why you're poor. Whoa, I mean, that sends a shiver down my spine. It really does. And yet, I completely understand why I'd be cheering that if the cards in my life had been dealt differently and I hadn't been brought up a Christian. 10:54 is the time. George is in Croydon. George, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, that's the first time I've ever heard a clip like that from one of the Trump speeches anywhere in the media, and that is his tone. It is quite like Hitler, you're right, but that doesn't. That doesn't mean that there isn't that. This isn't the kind of thing. The international globalist system is. I mean, people are not necessarily. You know,
you are aware that you're now the guy that says it is a bit like Hitler, but.
Well, yeah.
Okay, as long as you're cool with that, you carry on.
Well, because it's not necessarily about selfishness and racism. It's about people realizing that there's a system. Our politicians represent the system, which represents the interests of finance. I mean, James.
It doesn't, though, does it? It doesn't. You can construe it like that. Hang on a minute. And the point is, most of these commercial decisions that have quotes left people behind end quotes have simply been taken to increase profit and reduce price. So it's not a massive global conspiracy. It's basic arithmetic. You are making widgets for 10 quid per widget. You work out, someone tells you, if you get them made at a factory in Singapore and ship them all the way back to the States, you're going to be paying 6 quid per widget. That's it. The equation is over. That's all it is. It's not a conspiracy. It's not globalism. It's not this. It's not that. It's not the other. It's just maths.
Or James, most people, individuals, want to be self-sufficient. It's a natural thing. Most families want to be self-sufficient. It's a natural thing. Communities and counties.
They want to be self-sufficient. You mean they want to abandon trade and just grow everything they need to eat?
You want to be able to support yourself and not be a slave to anything. And what the system has done, it's moved manufacturing here, food production there, it's moved things around the globe, and the banking system has done that, James, whether you like it or not, and it's made everybody completely dependent on them to the point where they actually own the system. And this is what Trump's saying, right?
Okay.
This is what he's saying.
So you sound a little bit mad. I've just explained to you why you might move your factory to the other side of the world.
You're making it, you're making a kind of a silly simplification of it. These things are controlled.
So why would you, if you were making widgets at £10 per widget and you found out you could make them in Singapore for £6 a widget, why would you move your factory to Singapore if it's not for the reasons I've suggested? If that's too simplistic, what reason would you give?
Well, I went to China, James.
Just answer the question, will you?
I met one of the people doing this, right? I met him in a hotel in Guangzhou. An American guy there. He was nearly crying. He was moving his factory to China because that was the thing that he couldn't.
Yeah.
He couldn't
There you go, George. You need to argue with yourself, not with me. He was moving his factory to China because he couldn't compete if he paid labour wages and what have you in the West, and that's where we are. It's not because of a global international conspiracy. Guess what, George? It's because it's cheaper in China. Full stop. And if you think you can change that, then you're going to have to tell the American people they'll be paying double for every widget they want by Christmas. And that's fine if he comes out and says that, but he doesn't, because he's a liar. He's a demagogue. And you're the guy that just said he is a lot like Hitler, but. T-Mutt is in Uxbridge. T-Mutt, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, I feel very passionate about this, but I think at the end of the day, what our problem is that we've become people who are so deeply embedded in our egos. And I think the problem with people feeling left out is because, religion and the Bible and things like that were being used to discriminate against some people, against women, against people of color. And the amount of melanin that somebody has in their skin or the kind of genitalia they carry has been used to tell them if they deserve a certain kind of life or not. So right now, those people are getting pretty much scared that entitlement is taken away from them, and the world is moving more into the oneness that it should have always been living under. We're all
but if you'd been in the fast lane just through an accident of birth, through a genetic inheritance, you'd be furious if suddenly the road was open equally to everybody. It still isn't, but the sense that it's moving in that direction would drive you potty.
I understand that. When you're used to entitlement, when you're used to privileges, you actually want to keep it that way and have, your generations, your kids and grandkids keep on enjoying that. But a gentleman earlier you had on said that we're so afraid of change. And yeah, change might be for the better or for the worse, but the only thing constant about this universe is change. The times are changing. People are realizing their potentials, regardless of what they look like.
I'll have whatever you're drinking this morning. I'll take 2 of those, please. I envy your optimism at the moment. I think if you were as immersed in all of this at the moment as I am, you might struggle to remain so upbeat. And that was no gentleman I was speaking to earlier. That was an opinion pollster. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm loath to clear the board. It's been one of those gradient hours where allow me to suggest that the quality of calls has been so high it would be a shame to move on. But I do want to bring Brexit into the mix as well. Okay, they're kind of like the hat trick at the moment for our time together. Brexit, the American election, and what's the other one you'd put at the top of the list? Uber. I'm going to bring Uber into this now, because Uber, it seems to me, and this just occurred to me as I had a comfort break during the news, so if I've got this horribly wrong, then we're going to have to change horses pretty quickly before the 11:15 travel news. Continuing just the conversation in general at the moment. Sometimes when the news is absolutely alive, you don't need me to come up with manufactured questions and challenges that you have to answer. I just open up my phone lines, shoot the breeze for a while, shoot my mouth off, lay out my stall, and then you can come and join in and either start throwing balls at my coconuts, if you pardon the expression, or indeed set out coconuts entirely of your own for everybody else to have a pop at. But it's all about Uber, isn't it? I now get socially embarrassed by Uber, because every time we're out with people, and the evening comes to an end, or it's time to go home, and your friends will say, I'm just going to get an Uber, I'm just going to call an Uber. We were out with friends for Sunday lunch yesterday, out in Surbiton, so there's no way I could have hailed a black cab, and the host just say, call as you like, we'll get you an Uber, we'll call for an Uber, don't you get an Uber, and Mrs. O'Brien has to, I can see it, it's a bit embarrassing for her, it's worse than being a Kidderminster Harriers fan. She has to go, James doesn't really do Uber, James doesn't really get Ubers. And everyone goes, why not? Why doesn't he get Ubers? Ubers are great, they're cheaper than James. And I sit there. Do you know, I even had this. I'm not going to tell you who was at the dinner party because it'll just confirm every cliche going. But I even had this at an Islington dinner party. I've been to one Islington dinner party in my life, okay? And I even had it at an Islington dinner party. At an end of an Islington dinner party, everyone's getting their Ubers. And I said, I'm not getting an Uber. They said, why not? And I said, well, I'm protecting the working rights of black cab drivers. I believe it's important for us to vote with our feet and protect them from the kind of exploitation and bad treatment that I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of myself. Yeah, everywhere, from an Islington dinner party right through to a UKIP jam sale, you're going to struggle to win an argument about Uber. You really are. And I never win the argument. I just never call them either. I'll call a local private hire company, or you don't need to know. But that's the point. So why is Uber doing so well? Because people book them, right? Why are black cab drivers being left behind? Because people travel with Uber. That's why black cab drivers are being left behind. Because of passengers. What do you do if you're a demagogue, if you're a fascist, if you're a rabble-rouser? You somehow claim that black cab drivers are being left behind by Goldman Sachs, who back Uber, or by whatever it may be. It's the passengers that are responsible. Goldman Sachs are enablers. Rupert Murdoch's son, who put hundreds of millions of pounds of investment in, they're enablers of unfairness, but they're not they might be even the architects of unfairness, but they are not the tools of unfairness. The tools of unfairness are us. I've had to move my factory to China, otherwise I can't compete. Well, why can't you compete? Well, because customers won't pay more for the same stuff just because it was made round the corner. So we talk endlessly now on both sides of the Atlantic about the people who've been left behind. They haven't been left behind. They've voted themselves into this situation by not going to the shop and saying, excuse me, could I pay double for something that's been made in America, please? And you want to know the absolute kicker here? The absolute point at which people like me begin to think, do you know what? Unbelievable. The real, or one of the actual fixable things about this economic unfairness would involve making very rich people and corporations pay more tax. Donald Trump now is selling the notion that he can help people who've been left behind while simultaneously boasting about not paying tax. And that is just the very distillation of dishonesty. But it's completely understandable. That's why I'm going to use my Uber example to prove it. You get told that the reason why you're not getting what you think you deserve is the fault of X, Y, and Z. In the absence of any other more compelling explanation, you're going to bite their arm off. If the truth is you're not getting what you think you deserve because of you, because you, like everybody else, go shopping with your eye on the price rather than where it was made. We all do. A few exceptions. A British-built bicycle, for example, that I have. I love it. I don't think anyone else in the world could have made a bicycle like mine. But what else? A car might have been made in Britain, but all the money is foreign. All the profits go elsewhere. You've been left behind. Why? Because you look at the price when you go shopping, and the people making the stuff that you want to buy look at the price too, and they do whatever they have to do to make the price as low as it could possibly be, because the lower the price, the more you'll buy. I think we just solved the world, and it's only 8 minutes after 11. Mark's in lower stuff. Mark, you can throw a spanner in the works if you want. What would you like to say?
I'll do my best. Good morning, James. I love the show.
You're very kind. Thank you.
I'm with you all the way on Uber. But this concept of the left behind in America. I've travelled to America on and off on business for many years, and it's only after going there for a few years I learned that there's a profound difference difference in our culture between Americans and British.
Go on.
One of the mistakes we all make is we think that we speak a common language, therefore we're the same, but we're not. And I'd say it comes down to market economy and the way the business system works and their political system and the way debate works. So, by way of anecdote, in America, your job title defines you. If you're a vice president or a senior vice president or something similar, or a vice duke of engineering, you are someone, yeah?
Yes.
And I had a friend of mine come to visit, a colleague, took him to my local pub, and I said, now,
I'm losing the phone line, Mark, which is really, really annoying, because I don't literally, a colleague of mine came to visit, I took him to a local pub and nothing. Look, we'll try and improve that. No, I probably can, but I just clear it with Caroline, because you must have been on a better wicket when you got put through, and I'll definitely come back to you. We'll pick it up at the pub. All right? Could be forgiven for believing I may have used that line before in my life. It's 9 minutes after 11. Let's go to Yati, who's in Mile End. What's going on, Yati?
Hello, James. It's great to talk to you. Wonderful show.
You don't have to say that. As soon as one caller does that, all the other callers think they have to do it as well. You really don't. Let's just take it as read. Go on, carry on, Yeti.
Okay, I think if you look at our society 30 years ago, you could apply for jobs, let's say in the Evening Standard. It was very basic. The phone number, you can apply for jobs. Housing was affordable. I worked for local government, and if people were unemployed, they applied for unemployment benefit office. Now things have changed, and I think there is a similarity and parallel between us here and America right now.
Yes.
Things have changed, whereby housing is not that affordable. You have to apply online because of the increase in the population, because there are more people. We're competing for jobs. And I do believe that the privileges that white Americans previously had, that's going back through the southern states with slave ownership, the red states, gun ownership, the job ownership that they had. I remember in Chicago, there was a time when they used to have privileged jobs for life, and then we had black mayors coming in and stopping that. The reality is they do resent this changing face of society. And when they talk about,
you can't really blame them for that. Even if it was a horrible society in which they rode high, they still rode higher than they do now. I'd be cross. I'd be cross.
Yes, you're right. You cannot blame them. But right at the back, you have at the bottom, you have the blacks, the underclass, you have the women, who now are making progress upwards. And you have at the top, you have the hedge fund managers and the bankers and the wealth creators. And right in the middle, you have these white working class who are now complaining about the erosion of their living standards. And I think you're quite correct when you say everything now, jobs have been relocated to places like Singapore for the...
Is there an alternative to that? Because this is where those dread phrases like political elite or whatever come in, and no one really knows what they mean. It just gives a label and a face to other people's unhappiness. What's the alternative to that? What's the alternative to that?
Well,
if I'm getting £6 a widget in Singapore and it's going to cost me 10 quid in Mile End, I'm going to Singapore. How can you stop that happening?
Well, of course, but I mean, the same. Well, this is you can't stop it happening. I think people just have to adapt. It's a bit like when Donald Trump blames Obama for jobs being outsourced to China, and we're going to make America great again. But as we say, the Super Bowl, perfect example. There's a great Super Bowl. You've got all this memorabilia, wonderful hats and everything else. Where is it made? In China.
Well, not just the Super Bowl, man. The Donald Trump clothing range.
Yeah.
The Donald Trump range of golf clothing has label that says "Made in China" on it, and so the guy is boasting about not paying his taxes and outsourcing jobs to the foreign lands, and simultaneously standing up in America in front of crowds full of people, or crowds are generally full of people, I suppose, in front of rooms full of people, and stating that these two things are awful. You've got to pay more. Businesses have got to pay their way more, and we've got to stop outsourcing jobs to America. He does it himself. It's incredible.
Well, you hit the nail on the head earlier when you said corporation tax. All these companies, getting away with the tax. So I think that it has to be a change of attitude, and I can see why people like Bernie Sanders are, touched a nerve, because he's fighting against the system. And it's just the system.
No, but he's naive as well, because it's not even the system. I think it's even simpler than that. And I told you this was a box fresh theory out of the 11 o'clock news. So I'm more than happy for people to have pot shots at it. But it's all about you. It's about when you go shopping, whether you're buying a car or a suit of clothes or a basket full of groceries, you're looking at the price, which means the people selling it to you are trying to keep the price as low as possible.
Which beautifully works into Brexit, because I've been having discussions with members of the family. Not just Brexit, the Uber.
Yes.
Because I do believe that it's you want a cheaper.
And you feel like a mug. You feel like a mug sometimes. You say, well, actually, I'm going to get a black cab. All my mates are getting an Uber, and I will often pay, not always, but I will often pay a little bit more than them. Unless it's one of those cabbies who actually follows through on the promise not to charge me, which I get a lot of promises. I've only had 2 free rides so far, but I'm very grateful for both of them. Yati, thank you very much indeed. This is really, really interesting. Thank you. Sometimes, I don't know what you do for a living. I'm talking to everyone now, not just Yati. But sometimes on Monday mornings at 10 to 10, I have a little, not a panic attack, that would be far too strong a word, but I do have a little thing in my back of my brain now, even after all these years. What if when I open my mouth, nothing comes out? A lot of UKIP supporters there thinking, well, that would mean that I had 2 wishes left from the genie, James. What if when I open my mouth in the morning... Did you see the letter sent around by one of the UKIP leadership campaigners claiming that it was an email? One of the leadership contenders sent around an email that he said had been sent round to all the mailing list. He was complaining about the mailing list being used to slag him off. I can't remember his name. He's the one that thinks his horse got raped by a gay donkey. That must narrow... Even in UKIP, that must narrow the field down, right? Even in a UKIP leader election, thinking that your horse got raped by a gay donkey must narrow it down. That can't apply to more than one candidate, surely, even in that party. No? So this email goes around saying, we've got to get this guy out of the race. Could you imagine what would happen if he were to be interviewed by Andrew Neil or, heaven forbid, James O'Brien on LBC? So the doubted defenders of democracy, once again, they're suggesting that a journalist's ability to spot lies from 100 yards away is something that should not be celebrated, but should be desperately avoided. And we're laughing at America. It's 11:15. And, I guess the little bit at the end of that advert must have got cut, where it goes, oh, and James will be here as normal at 10 o'clock, just with you and his phone. Nothing else. No bells, no whistles, no transatlantic jollies for me, no hotel rooms, no trips, no, what's he doing tomorrow? He's going to a shooting range. No, just me and my little switchboard. Won't even have any guests. Will we have any guests, Caroline? We're going to have any guests on Wednesday? We should probably have a few. We should probably get a few. If you want some, she says. We should probably get a few guests in on Wednesday. I don't know. Do we need guests? I mean, what happened today? We started talking about America, started talking about why it's not the 2 coasts that matter, it's smack in the middle of America. Who rings in? Bob Worcester, founder of Maury, and a man who grew up in precisely the areas I'd just been pontificating about and admitting I didn't know enough about to draw conclusions. He rings in, he grew up there, he grew up alongside these people who feel they've been left behind, gave us chapter and verse on what was going on. A lot of you have asked, why didn't you play the Ray Liotta clip when Sir Robert Worcester rang in? And the answer is, I didn't want to seem childish in front of a grown-up. How pathetic is that? So I've got this little internal dialogue going, well, he clearly listens a lot because he's been kind enough to compliment previous shows, but what if he's never heard the Ray Liotta thing before, and then I play it out, and he's just going to think, I thought I was contributing to a serious news debate. This guy's playing clips of Hollywood actors blowing smoke up his fundament. So we may play it later, but that's why I didn't play it then. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. These people who feel left behind have not been left behind by the people that they're blaming. They've been essentially left behind by themselves. This is the $64,000 question, isn't it? What would you do? Donald Trump doesn't pay tax, and he gets a lot of stuff made overseas. All the steel in his buildings comes from China. The engines on his jets will be made by Rolls-Royce. He does absolutely nothing as an employer to bring jobs back to America, but he understands one thing, and that is, if you've got people that are angry and you give them a target for their anger, they're not going to ask that many questions about whether it's fair or not, especially if the truth is their misfortunes are in many ways self-inflicted. How can you say that, James? Because I know that when you go shopping later today, you'll be looking for quality, but you'll be looking more at price. And you'll buy what's cheaper, which means the person selling it will try and get it into the shops for as little money as possible. That's just simple. American election explained via Uber. I still think he's in with a very, very good chance of winning, by the way. Don't think for a moment I'm getting caught up in this revelation that the FBI didn't find anything in those emails, because we're post-truth now. So Trump says, oh, it's great that they're investigating her. Maybe things aren't rigged after all. They conclude their investigation and explain that there is no case to answer. Suddenly everything's rigged again. And what's Mr. Farage doing? Having a little march to the Supreme Court to complain about British judges enacting British law in British courts. And truly we are down the rabbit hole. Have you seen this news? He wants to have a little march. He wants to take 100,000 people to the Supreme Court. To what? to try and intimidate the independent British judiciary? Or he says, I think, to remind people what they voted for. I appreciate your core support is a little bit flaky, pal, but I don't think anyone's forgotten what they voted for in June yet. It's quite incredible. And yet we're all still standing alongside going, ooh, I wonder why this is happening. I'm not wondering why this is happening. I know why this is happening. Same reason it's happened throughout history. You take angry people who feel they're not getting a fair deal, give them a false target for their fury, and just sit back and watch the whole place burn down. Ali's in Brent Cross. Ali, what made you pick up the phone?
You know what is, I'm getting a bit fed up of listening to all these people whinge about they've been left behind. My father came here in the 60s as an immigrant. He worked in a factory here for a few years and then set up his own businesses and never worked for anybody else. He ingrained that into me where I'm 40-odd years old now. I've never worked for anybody in my life. I've not done well in college. I've never done well in university, but I still had that mentality to, you know what, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to make something for myself. I'm not super rich, but I'm happy. Now, a lot of these people, if they diverted that energy of whinging towards actually getting themselves off their backsides and doing something, you know what? You would do something, because we're living in a system.
Some of us would, and a lot of these people are working, Ali. They're just, it's as if they're treading water. They're putting in the hours, they're putting in the shift, and they don't feel as if they're making progress. And I admire probably just your personality type to be optimistic and to be like that. But if your father had been born here into an aristocratic family with generations of inherited wealth and privilege, and for some reason the political system into which he was thrown actually took away all of those historical privileges, he'd be cross about it, and so would you, mate. I mean,
I understand that, but you know what it is? Generally in life, this is also not just when it comes to your work life or your socially, intellectually, emotionally. If you're going to be always looking down at something, because there's always going to be someone better than you. You can't live a miserable life just because there's someone better than you. You can always better yourself. There's nothing really stopping you. I personally believe there is I saw a little meme on the internet the other day. It was basically a migrant. He said, I come here with nothing. I can't speak a word of English, a pound in my pocket, but I'm still making a good living here. Now, if these people generally who are coming, this is the way they're coming here.
It's easy, this. I could do this all day. Yeah, they might say they're making a good living here, Ali, but they're living 47 to a room and undercutting British workers.
You know, when my father came here, that's how they were living. But now they've all got many properties by themselves. It's not something that's a short-term solution, James. Sometimes, you know what, we have to struggle for a little while. Even in the last years, maybe when the recession was there, I'm not saying I had an easy time, but I didn't whinge. I made do with what I had.
You're whinging about whingers. So you are actually a whinger, albeit in a very postmodern sense.
Yeah, I know. But,
you're a whinger.
I'm trying to counter them, but it's also in the sense
I'm going to go out on a limb here, judging by your name and the fact that I'm going to suggest you're not actually ginger, otherwise you'd be a ginger whinger. That would be quite the hat-trick.
I'm not ginger, sorry, but I have to support you there. But, with regards to the Brexit and with Trump and everything, sometimes I also say, people should be very wary of what they wish for. Sometimes people don't use their brains enough, then they just go by slogans.
Well, we're not robots. You want people to make decisions based entirely on logic and brain power, then you'd be preaching to a nation full of computers. People have got hearts and sinew, blood and muscle, and they've got tempers and emotions that can be manipulated by evil people, which we've seen on both sides of the Atlantic. Maybe not even evil, just utterly self-absorbed, utterly self-interested, utterly egotistical. Whether you're marching on the Supreme Court to complain about British judges enacting British law in British courts, or whether you're standing up in front of crowds full of Americans with a history of not paying tax and taking jobs out of America, saying that the reason why your life is rubbish is because of people who don't pay tax and take jobs out of America. Everyone else except me. And I'm not Jewish either. Donald Trump might add in brackets with the rhetoric of the last few days of the campaign. 27 minutes after 11. Ali, thank you. Matthew's in Romford. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Hello there. So, I've been following this car crash of an election quite closely for, it feels like forever, but over the last year. And I've been looking at some of the connections with Brexit as well. And one of the things that stood out for me, that video that you showed on the website with Trump saying a complete juxtaposition to what actually...
Well, if people who haven't seen it, they can go and see it now at lbc.co.uk. But Trump describing Obama's treatment of a pro-Trump protester at a rally as in pretty abysmal and extreme terms, juxtaposed with Obama actually doing that thing, and it's the polar opposite of what Trump said it was. But that won't change a single mind. No one's going to go, my God, yes, I have been mugged.
No, they wouldn't. And I think what's happened here, I mean, I kind of go, it kind of led me to start thinking of Michael Gove's sort of infamous, people have got fed up with listening to experts.
Do you know when he said that? Because I double-checked it. This is what an anorak I am. I'm like you, I've reached for that button quite a few times. Do you know what question he was answering when he said that? The country's had enough of experts.
I think it was quite a technical question as well.
Can you name a single economist who thinks Brexit would be good for Britain? Can you name a single economist who thinks Brexit would be good for Britain? I think the country's had enough of experts.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, I don't think, I mean, the thing about that point, I don't think it's necessarily that, I think people often in their judgments, I mean, I'm not trying to put myself in an elite here, but I like to think I've got some critical reasoning.
49.9% of the country is of below average intelligence. It's very important to remember that.
I mean, well, exactly. And all my family voted Brexit, and I'm the black sheep. And I used to put forward what I thought were coherent, reasoned arguments. It didn't matter what the literal truth was in what I was saying, even if I could prove it.
Sure.
People like to resort to rule of thumb, heuristic, common sense type logic.
Anecdotes.
And this is now being reinforced through social media, where you're essentially, I know this has all been said before, but people are living in it is post-truth. You are living in an echo chamber. You have got people like Milos, whatever his name is from Breitbart, who is now, these people are now suddenly seen as articulating the voice of these oppressed masses. But what these people are willing to do, it seems, is in quite an Orwellian type fashion, a doublethink fashion. They're willing to suspend, even though what Donald Trump said was completely false.
Yes.
They're willing to believe in it. They're willing, because for the greater good and for the sentiment that was contained within it. And that Obama is part of a sneering elite that looks down.
Yes, but I can destroy you intellectually now, you see, by calling you a libtard. And that's it. All your arguments are over.
Well, I mean, if that destroys me intellectually, then I wouldn't really put forward much. And I mean, believe me, I've got people that have used that exact same expression on me. Which
Yes,
is weird,
I'm not surprised.
I said most sensible people, really, don't subscribe to being left or right. These things are fairly meaningless. Generally, it's a pick and mix when it comes to politics for the thinking person. Anyway, the person
You'd certainly hope so. Speaking of thinking people, I am a little late for the news, and some of them will be waiting for it. Although I could continue listening to you, we'll have to park it until the next time. I think you're right. That point about experts. Although Michael Gove clearly feels that experts are back in fashion now because he's currently covering the American election for the Times newspaper, drawing upon his expertise as both journalist and politician. Quite what that does for his constituents over in Surrey Heath, well, if he ever agrees to be interviewed by me, I'll ask him. It's 11:31. By popular request today, I may have a little look in the box of trolls. I've been neglecting them a little bit lately because well, you don't actually have to go into the box of trolls to find absolutely bonkers contributions. You're getting it from professional politicians. There's one Conservative, quite a few actually taken to Twitter to describe the decision of the High Court, or not even the decision, the interpretation, the explanation of British law provided by the High Court with regard to triggering Article 50 as being some sort of affront to democracy or some sort of assault upon sovereignty. It's quite incredible where we are at the moment, but I will, if you're very good, have a little look in the box of trolls later. We'll continue our conversation about Donald Trump, and indeed we haven't really moved it into Brexit, although the last caller did a good job of knitting the two together with that reference to the experts, i.e. people that know what they're talking about, being squeezed out by both movements. And oddly enough, I was just chatting in the break there to my colleague Juan, who's of Colombian extraction, and you have to say, if you were looking at America from the point of view of being South American, you'd be worried. And the message of Brexit would be, even if they win, things will get worse, things will get more toxic, things will get more racist. So you'd like to think maybe if Donald Trump won, the silver lining would be that all these people who are furious with foreigners would calm down a bit because their guy won. Well, you have a look at Britain post-Brexit and tell me whether all the people who are furious with foreigners have calmed down and cheered up a bit. They're even more miserable than they were before, which I would have thought was, well, impossible. There you go. Theo Usherwood is in America. There's no way of proving it, though. This is the beauty of radio. I'm going to be presenting tomorrow's show from the moon. But he is genuinely in America, seriously. I don't know how we can make this clear. Can we get some sound effects in the background or something like that? I don't know.
It's very early in the morning. I'm actually in my hotel room, James. But I have spent the weekend leaving New York, and I've gone up into, I started New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and then across into New York State and down to Yale University at New Haven. And something that has struck me about outside of New York is that it feels like a country on its knees. I went to New Jersey, and there was a shopping mall over more than 1 million square foot, and there were only 5 shops in it. And the feeling from speaking to Trump supporters was that America wasn't working for them. And actually, they weren't necessarily particularly bothered about about migrants per se, or America, New Jersey particularly, as a diverse state. But what they were bothered about was their way of life that had been eroded over the last 20 or so years and had been accelerated as a result of the financial crisis in 2008, and it's never come back. And when I spoke to them and I asked them what do they want, and they'd parrot the line back, I'd like to make America great again. They'd say they'd like to make America great again. Yes. And then you'd say to them, what does America great again look like? And then they come back. You get any number of reasons would come back to you. One woman said freedom of religion, which many of your listeners might find slightly ironic, given that Mr. Trump wants to prevent Muslims coming into the US. Or they'd say they'd said that they'd like to end the corruption in Washington, and they'd say that Hillary Clinton should be in jail. But what was interesting is that all the answers are individual, and you speak to women who support Trump, and they're also willing to forgive things that he says when it comes to the locker room banter,
or sex offending. I prefer the description. I prefer.
But they call it the phrase I heard from one supporter was, it's quirkiness. It's Donald Trump being quirky.
Yeah.
And what's
grabbing women by the vagina. God, that guy, he's so quirky. And anyway, all men talk about that, according to Nigel. Carry on, Theo, sorry.
What it does is that what it does for them is that they don't like it, but it says that he's not a mainstream, he's not part of the normal political so-called metropolitan
or civilized. He's not civilized.
He's like them. He's got all the. He's not polished. He's not. He represents all their failings, if you like. That they can project whatever they like onto Donald Trump, and there's a complete democracy in many ways here. It seems out in a stick seems to have failed, because people aren't listening to politicians make statements and have an argument. They're just listening to a sort of a wall of abuse, a toxic wall of abuse. And what's perhaps the most saddening thing that I've seen is that it's ruined families. Particularly the relationships between mothers and sons and fathers and daughters. I was speaking to one waitress who is finding it very difficult to get on with her dad at the moment. He's elderly Trump supporter, and she's backing Hillary Clinton, and every time the television comes on with Hillary Clinton attack adverts about what Donald Trump says, she has to turn it off for her 5 young daughters. She just can't allow them to watch it. It's so awful. And that while at the same time, Granddad, for those 5 daughters, is backing Donald Trump. It's divided families. One woman nearly broke down in tears as she said that her son, a police officer, wanted Donald Trump to win, and he thought that Donald Trump would make America strong again on the world stage, whereas she thought that his statements could lead to World War III. And it's gone in this debate, this election has gone into, the poison of it has gone into every single household, from what I can tell, and it's driven people apart. And
there are more Brexit parallels. There really are. Theo Usherwood, many thanks indeed. 03456060973 is the number you need if you want to join us now in knitting these two political phenomena together. And it's not my idea that they're similar. It's something Trump's been saying for ages. And this, of course, as Brexit continues to present problems that weren't predicted. This trip to India that Theresa May's on is going to be, if you read proper news coverage of it, it's going to be the mother of all eye-openers. Yeah, first thing that Modi said, first thing the Indian leader has said, yeah, we'll need more immigration into Britain. So this is one of those shiny new trade deals that they told us we'd be able to sign while reducing immigration, and India would be at the very front of the queue. But the first thing they've said is that we want to make it easier for people to move to Britain from India. Oh, happy days. And do you want to know something else really interesting? Which country in the G20 do you think invests most in India currently? I'll leave that for you to chew on, because obviously when we leave the EU, we'll be able to do loads of deals and trade that we can't do at the moment as a member of the EU. So who will be the person that we're aiming for? Who will be the country that currently, the G20 country, the 20 most advanced economies in the world, out of all of them, who currently has the most invested in India? Because it's them we want to copy, isn't it? When we get out of the EU, it'll be the country that's got more investment in India than any other that we want to copy. I'll tell you who it is in a moment. First though, Richard is, I got some phone lines free as well, 0345 6060973. Richard is in Bristol. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I just wanted to expand on the point that one of the other guys said earlier on, which was that there was a sort of population control problem. And it sort of reminded me that this was said by Thomas Malthus like 200 years ago. And it's a sort of inevitable reality that...
Is it inevitable?
Sorry?
Is it inevitable?
Well, the more we produce, we make a surplus, is the idea, and then that surplus is used for population control. And the problem is that no one's going to vote for population control, so you can't disseminate that information to everyone. No one's going to listen to it. So we just end up with this sort of ebb and flow of growing too much and then crashing because there's just too many people. And it's, I think it kind of happens on timescales that are longer than our own lifetime. So we only get that short window to see what is happening. And
right, well, historically, the checks and balances on that have been things like famine, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. And
we've still got that.
We've got so good at that we're pushing back. The environment doesn't stop us from pushing ahead with that. But of course, ultimately it will, and that's what we're seeing with kind of the climate change and the global warming and all that sort of stuff that's going on at the moment. So this is sort of symptomatic of much bigger underlying problems that we have, and it all goes back to what he said 200 years ago, which is that human nature is inevitably going to have this problem because you just can't communicate with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with that, and you explain it very well. I don't know that it is necessary. I mean, you're right to say it's a much bigger issue than the ones that we're discussing, but I don't know in terms of micro politics rather than macroeconomics or macro politics. It's not part of this conversation. Maybe it should be, but it does not play a part in why Donald Trump's supporters are so disaffected. What they are disaffected by is not population growth. It is actually, I think, the simple pursuit via technology and the shrinking world and issues of transport, the pursuit of price. Sell it cheap, sell more, people happy, until they suddenly realise that the reason why it's cheap is because it's made at a factory on the other side of the world, and the reason why their dad hasn't got a job is because they've shut the factory that was up the road. 0345 6060973. Come on now and call me. I've got a couple of phone lines free. It's 11:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's nearly 12 o'clock. It's one of those days where we're just kind of chatting together, really, rather than necessarily addressing obvious questions, as is evinced by the fact that if I had to distill what's gone on thus far into a single question, it would be who's really to blame for people being left behind? Some dispute over whether or not they actually are left behind. But I think it's fair to say that if the main employer in your part of America no longer employs and nothing has stepped into that vacuum to replace it, you will feel left behind. You have been left behind by people like Donald Trump, who get their baseball caps and their golf range of clothes and their shirts made in China by Chinese workers, and then they ship them back to America and sell them to American workers because that way they make more money and they keep the price low for the American worker. So really, it's like Uber, I suggested 50 minutes ago. People like me can bleat until we're blue in the face about how supporting Uber undermines the fundamentals of British employment law. It undermines the simple pledge that every taxi driver received from society when they did the knowledge and bought a car, that no one else would be allowed to pursue passengers in the way that they can, and no one else would be able to hail. And then, of course, a company comes along that effectively does allow you to hail. And then they use technology and legal arguments to avoid that conclusion. But why is Uber doing well? Because people use it. Why is America suffering industrially because people buy cheaper stuff from elsewhere. It's quite simple. I don't know how you fix it. Matthew's in Chessington. Matthew, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, Trump seems to do everything that he criticises his opponents for doing. So, as you said, outsourcing everything to China. He's got a history of ripping off small businesses, and if they want to take him to court, their lawyers can't afford to beat him. He's exactly the person that wants to rip off the people who he's being supported by.
And while boasting about not paying tax, which means they have to pay more, the poor people, the ordinary Joes.
Exactly. And I don't think there is, if there were a cabal of rich businessmen wanting to keep these people from having decent jobs or money or anything like that, he'd be a prime candidate. He's exactly the kind of person who would not stop at ripping anybody else off if he can get away with it, and he gets away with it. That's one of the many things that really annoys me about Trump and people who support him.
But he gets away with it for reasons that I think we understand better now than we did at the outset, and it is the focus that he provides for grievances. It's an utterly wrong focus, but it's better than nothing. And if the real reason why you're out of work, or why you're not out of work, why you're struggling to make ends meet, is because America has been changed by the changes in the world, by the fact that I can open a factory in Singapore and make my widgets for $4 less than I can make them in Michigan, that's not anybody's fault, except the customers.
Well, there was a comedian, an American comedian, I think maybe, what's his name, Doug Stanhope or something like that, years ago, being interviewed on the radio, and saying if somebody with no English language skills and no qualifications can get across the border and take your job, then what the hell are you doing with your life if somebody with no qualifications and no English can do the job better than you can? So I think it's people not making anything of their own lives and blaming somebody else for it.
Yes, up to a point, and that is a position I've adopted myself in the past, but it's a little unfair given that the person who feels he's been replaced by the recent arrival might actually have wanted a better job than that, but that job doesn't exist anymore. But again, that's not the fault of the recent arrival, that's the fault of the company boss who decided to move the factory to Singapore, to do stuff like what Donald Trump does, which is the point you made at the outset. 11:53 is the time. Let's segue into this. I'm still utterly confused by this. Well, not confused, but confounded by the objections to that Supreme Court ruling. Theresa May's going to get an almighty kicking, or at least a wake-up call in India. Already one minister's come forward and said, I don't think we'll be able to do a deal unless we can get an agreement on immigration. And I promised that I'd tell you the country in the G20 that currently invests more in India than any other advanced economy in the world, any other economy in the world. So once we get out of the European Union, we'll be able to do all these great deals. You remember? All these great deals. So which country do you think is currently investing more in India than any other country in the G20? You guessed it, didn't you? You know who it is, don't you? It's us. Already. We've already got more investment in India than any other country in the G20. But hey, we've got to get out of the EU to do deals. Nick's in Bethnal Green. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I was just going to quote, or just sort of comment on the fact, why would you move a company to a country and another country and start making things cheaper? If it costs £10 here, why £6 there?
Yes.
It's quite common. It's basic. It's a third world. This is the third world option.
Yeah.
We can't have a factory with the standards that they have in this country, because we've got fire marshals, health and safety. We've got workers' rights, break times. They've got underage kids working, sleeping under benches, being whipped if they don't do as they're told, getting paid £1 a week, blah blah blah. We can't physically do that.
And even if they did have regulations in place, but there's a lot of places in the world where you can do things a lot more cheaply than here, and it's simply because of the cost of living, because of the economy. You might not be employing children, or you might not be running a sweatshop. You're just running like the call centres in India. They're not sweatshops. They don't employ children. They can just do it a lot cheaper than here, because you can pay them less for a decent standard of living if you live in Delhi than you get if you live in Dalston.
Yeah, that's true. But then you look at the factory that collapsed in Bangladesh that was making Primark clothes, killed 400 poor people. Primark made a few little donations to it. So we're really sorry. Oh, it's terrible.
I haven't got the story. I haven't got the story in front of me. So if you've
that happened years ago.
No, I'm familiar with it. I just haven't got the absolute certainty that we should sort of malign the reputation of that one company. So if you have misspoken or misremembered, I apologise. But that is only half the point.
But I'm saying it's the third world option. It's not. We're completely. You mentioned the thing of Uber. It's the third world option. They're not disabled access. They've got problems with So I read about guide dogs. It's the third world options, uninsured.
Well, for some it is. I think I can guess what trade you're in now, can't I?
No, I'm not a black.
Are you not? Because the passengers are getting in the cars in the same way that they're buying the cheap pants and the cheap shirts and the cheap clothes. What are you wearing at the moment? God, it sounds like a sex line. What are you? What are you wearing at the moment? I bet you didn't look in too deeply. You didn't look too deeply into the provenance of the clobber that you're wearing now, did you?
No, probably not. But an Adidas top isn't a third world option.
How do you? Well, where was it made?
I don't know. I've got no idea. But Adidas is a massive company. Chances are it was made somewhere, but it's not the third world option. There's a comeback to when things happen. If you've got the third world option, if you're using, like you used Uber as an example, it's all right while it's all right. But when there's a problem, it's not all right because there's not the same. There's not the insurance. There's not the comeback. There's not the accountability. There's not
China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and Indonesia have the most Adidas manufacturers in Asia.
Yeah.
So you could easily be wearing something that's been made in a Chinese sweatshop.
Maybe that's true, but I don't agree with that. I don't think it's right. We shouldn't.
Well, then you shouldn't have bought it.
Yeah, but where else? Where do I buy? What do I buy? I can't afford to buy something that's handmade. I'm not a politician. I can't have a handmade Savile Row.
70 grand a year for the politicians. The ones that are wearing handmade Savile Row suits are not sustaining those sort of sartorial decisions on their politician's salary. But I take your point, just as you take mine. What are you going to do? What are you going to complain about? The fact that you're buying cheap stuff and that is putting British business or American business out of work? It's coming up to 11:59. One of the other UKIP leadership contenders, not the one that circulated an email this weekend saying that he shouldn't be allowed to run because if he ever ends up being interviewed by me, it'll be an absolute car crash. But another one, Suzanne Evans, who you might be familiar with, she pops up on LBC quite often. She suggested this morning that judges should be subjected to what she described as democratic control while retaining their independence. And I know that we've come around so many times during our conversations together in recent years to this point at which you go, but that is arguing that the earth is flat despite the fact you've just sailed around it. How can you be independent and controlled at the same time? So is there any point in continuing a conversation about that judgment, this High Court judgment that said British law, British judges said British law in a British court is this, and everyone's up in arms about it because either they don't understand, I apologise for that, it sounds condescending, or they don't care. There is, I don't think, any third way, but if you can present me with one, I'd love to talk to you after the news. So British judges in British court explain British law and uphold the sovereignty of the British Parliament, okay? These are many of the platforms that make our democracy pretty close to the best available system of government on the planet, okay? And people are cross. I would suggest they either don't understand what the rule of law is, what an independent judiciary means, what the relationship between the executive and the judiciary actually is in this country, which is fine. I guess it's the job of journalists to explain it to them, or it used to be. These days it's the job of journalists to tell them lies and encourage them to start throwing things at people or marching. Or they don't care about the independence of the judiciary or indeed about the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. And if genuinely, the more people don't care about these things, the closer we move to fascism. That's next.